English translation, 251st, Contact, Part 3. Friday, 3rd February, 1995, 1 hours.
The findings and the message to the human beings of the Earth will one day be the factors that lead to the collapse of the fable picture about their origins that was assembled by the early ancestors of the Earth humans. And that suddenly, many truth vultures come to the frightening realization that the Earth human, on the one hand, does not originally come from the planet Earth, and on the other hand, is not the sole human form of life in the universe. One prophecy states that on the 5th of June 1995, the day will already be when extraterrestrials will officially land on the Earth, as a second prophecy predicts for 1998. But this must not be counted on, because humanity on the Earth is not yet able to cope with such contacts and all resulting knowledge and the associated insights. But if this were to happen, the Pleiadians Plejaren would withdraw and stay away from the Earth and its inhabitants in the future, as Sfath already explained in the 40s of the 20th century and Quetzal in recent times. But in reference to these prophecies, it is really only about prophecies and therefore not about predictions, which means that everything can change and the prophecies therefore do not have to fulfill themselves if the necessary prerequisites for it are not given. And exactly this is the case, because the prerequisite is that if everything happens according to the truth, the human being on the Earth first rectifies the damage or the degeneracy of their genetic manipulation and becomes completely different and of a natural sense in thinking and acting, before they gain open contact to alien races and peoples, and thus to extraterrestrials. This means, however, that a whole series of years must pass before this prerequisite is fulfilled. Until then, however, all kinds of events and changes, etc., will occur on the Earth and in the human being of this planet, which, on the one hand, are simply evolutionarily necessary and, on the other hand, unavoidable due to the thinking and acting of the life form of the Earth human, from which many things will inevitably result, which are often very dangerous as well as inhibiting evolution, but on the other hand, also promoting evolution and therefore absolutely unavoidable. So if you look at everything in this manner, then official contacts with extraterrestrials are not really recommendable at the moment, because the Earth human being would not yet be able to cope with them in the right form, both from the religious sectarian as well as the secular sectarian and military side, and also from the economic and political side. So it would be completely out of place for the present and for the future if official contacts with extraterrestrials were to take place. This is currently only possible in an individual form or in certain small groups, whereby in this regard also secret contacts in military and official form are excluded. However, the longer this goes on, the more it leads to contact swindlers and sighting swindlers appearing, who already present perfectly falsified alleged film and photo evidence with computers, who are then believed just like all the swindlers, fraudsters, charlatans, and delusionists, etc., who, in matters of extraterrestrials, God, Jesus Christ, Mary and Joseph, Moses and various saints and masters, are able to cast a spell over many stupid believers because the human being in his or her search for the truth is simply too easily and credulously led around by the nose through lies and deceit. Well, before it gets so far that contacts with extraterrestrials will take place in official form, when everything goes the way of its correctness, then this will only be when the Earth human is mature enough for it. And exactly that will take some time, during which a great deal will happen. Also in the respect that only certain proofs will be found that, on the one hand, the Earth human originally does not come from this world, and on the other hand, that they do not exist alone in the universe, and therefore also not alone in this galaxy, the Milky Way. If one wants to consider the things that are still going on up to the time when the first official contacts with extraterrestrials take place, then one has to create a certain chronology of the coming history. But it might not be advisable to give exact dates, because this would again result in things that could change future events just as unfavorably, as many people could suffer disturbances of consciousness, etc. Because through the knowledge of that which is coming, many things would be tried to change that which cannot be changed in any kind and wise, because these are predictions and not changeable prophecies. For this reason, I will therefore not name any date, although I know them, which is why I will simply list the most important events or occurrences, etc., of the future in chronological order, starting with the year 1995, in the course of which it will be shown that natural disasters will continue to cause calamity and will not come to an end. The events in this regard will move up and down, so sometimes there will be more, and sometimes there will be less, but on the whole, everything will increase. Unfortunately, there will also be no change for the better in terms of overpopulation, quite the opposite. Furthermore, in 2003 in March, a blow is to be expected from the United States and its presidency, which will strike the whole world in the head, just as Islamic fundamentalism will make much and more of itself, talking and casting a spell over the whole world. Insurrections, revolutions, wars, terrorism, and other unrest of all kinds will increase greatly, with Islamic fundamentalism, in particular, playing a very sad role. Also, the health of the human being is extremely endangered, because apart from the rapid spread of AIDS, also the consequences of the mad cow disease in humans will appear increasingly, whereby in this connection, not only the Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome will be the only effect. Also, with the animals, the mad cow disease effects will increasingly occur. But all this will not be enough, because another terrible epidemic will break out in Asia, which will be transmitted by waterfowl and migratory birds, which are immune to the disease, through their faces to chickens. When the birds come into contact with chickens in search of food and excrete their excrement, which is then taken up by the poultry, thereby spreading the epidemic, and also to humans, mammals, and fish, etc. The disease is transmitted when they eat the feces or the meat of contaminated poultry or birds. A lung disease will also break out in humans through the guilt of China, where bioweapons are being researched, and through carelessness pathogens are released. The danger of the use of chemical weapons, which has been practiced for a long time and which is constantly renewed, will increase despite other efforts, as will nuclear and biological weapons. The risk of nuclear reactor accidents is also on the increase all around the world. For the next few years, France in particular should exercise all conceivable caution in this respect. For a prophecy warns against a Jiaowen lion, which can be prevented if those responsible take the right steps, because a prophecy can be changed. The first steps have already been taken for a new movement that will work for complete nonviolence, while another group will be formed through which a woman will attain a great and powerful world power. While mass tourism takes on more and more powerful forms and slowly but surely destroys the last paradises of the earth, the first steps are taken for a Mars flight, which will not exactly be under a good star. However, during which only shortly afterwards more luck will be granted, even if problems of a technical nature will unexpectedly arise due to certain problems. All this will only happen shortly after the time when the worldwide plight of unemployment and all the evils associated with it will finally be resolved and mastered. But then there will also be a new increase in the arsenals of weapons, when the worldwide production of weapons will be boosted again. These are already again the first signs of an impending Third World War, which is announced by prophecy. If the Earth human does not make an effort to avert this danger by his or her reason and a correspondingly correct thinking and acting. But if humans do not act against the fulfillment of prophecy, then a new and very destructive new weapon will find its perfection, which will cause devastating consequences at the next World War. This can also happen because the surveillance of the Earth from space is criminally neglected. And again, new weapons will be talked about, as well as the death of 4 heads of state who will die within 7 days. This will be a last sign of danger of the fact that the world war that has been feared for so long will still break out within only about 2 years if the Earth humans do not finally become masters of reason and stop all evil. If this does not happen, The people will no longer benefit when they try to protest against the new lethal weapons in order to outlaw them, because the arsenals of weapons in many countries will then already be full of them. So it will no longer be of any use if laws are subsequently drawn up prohibiting the use of these weapons. If the human begins does not finally come to his or her senses, then the Third World War cannot be avoided, which will first start with conventional weapons, but then escalate into nuclear, chemical, biological, and radiation weapons. The World War will then begin in a certain year in the month of November, after about 5 years of work in intensive form, whereby this time will be preceded by another 4 years in indefinite preparatory form. If the war really breaks out, then it will last up to about 1 month shy of 4 years, so it will end in October of the 4th year, after the northern hemisphere of the Earth has been largely destroyed by nuclear fire and radioactive radiation, by which both the animal world and the entire plant world will be destroyed, if the human being does not see to it that prophecy only proves to be such and does not come true. But if this does not happen, then the 4 years of war will be followed by another bitter 11 years of need, misery, famine, and many other evils. The descendants will be crippled and mutated as a result of the radioactive radiation, and many of those who survive the war will be radioactively contaminated and burned, as will horrible and horrifying skin diseases caused by chemical weapons. This will also be the case with biological weapons, as they will cause ulcers and many other evils, and even evil human abortions and so on. Before all this happens, however, if prophecy is fulfilled through human guilt, the scientists find in the DNA chain the gene that was manipulated too early and is responsible for the human's rapid aging. This is likely to be before the end of this year, as the preparatory work was already done in 1994. It is questionable, however, whether the scientists will make their discovery public and evaluate it in the manner it actually deserves. Because what it looks like will only be discussed in a truly open form much later, so it will be a long time before the public is fully informed about it. It will therefore take a very long time before genetic manipulation is reversed by manipulating the gene in question backwards, without the scientists knowing for the time being that they have come across a factor in the gene that was manipulated millions of years ago. If the prophecy about another world war is fulfilled, if the Earth humans do not rethink things very quickly and steer everything in a good direction, then also the consequences of the Third World War will be very devastating, as well as a huge revenge campaign against the war instigators, which will be triggered and directed by a bloodthirsty man, who, how could it also be otherwise, will once again be a representative of God, a pope. But this is also subject to the condition that prophecy be fulfilled through the guilt of the Earth humans. In the not-too-distant future, the Earth is threatened by the melting of the polar caps, as well as another severe economic crisis, which in turn will spread to the entire world. And once again, a world war will threaten the Earth and the entire human race by their unreasonableness. The Fourth World War. Some sensible people, however, are able to neutralize the threat, which is not least once again promoted by the invention of new, powerful weapons, which will be a realization of the weapons from science fiction novels, namely in the field of deadly light emitters, ray cannons, ray rifles, and ray pistols, etc. In the field of the invention of new, powerful weapons. All this is linked to 3 scientists who will create an incredibly cheap source of energy. However, this will not be the only new source of energy, because another one will also be found based on sound vibrations. But this will also lead to the development of new deadly weapons. Science uses everything it can get its hands on. So it does not fail that the greenhouse effect can be stopped by humans and applied in reverse form, whereby then also a further melting of the polar caps can be prevented, whereby also the very sharply risen water level of all seas sinks again. In this time, the Earth human dedicates himself or herself again increasingly to space travel, which they neglected for certain years. At this time, Venus becomes of special interest for the Earth human, which is why it is also considered to send a crewed space capsule to the volcano planet. In the same process, humanity again opens up a new source of energy by taking advantage of the inner powers of the Earth. And in the further development, then again a dangerous new weapon, or two of them, will emerge whereby the one absolutely destructively affects all matter, solely by its high and inaudible sound for humans, while it will exhibit a deadly effect on life forms of all kinds, thus an ultrasonic weapon. The second weapon will be based on high-frequency energies, which will also be able to destroy and kill everything. And the discoveries and inventions will go on. Also in the field of genetic engineering and genetic manipulation, because it comes as it must come, and quite contrary to the enemies of genetic manipulation, who already today are raving against it. The future is not too far off when it will be possible to crossbreed plants and animals through genetic manipulation and create completely new forms of life. Thus, the lowly intelligent oppositional criers will shout in vain, "Who should truly be glad that science has finally progressed so far that genetic manipulation will become possible, because this alone will one day guarantee that the genetically manipulated degeneration in the Earth human will one day be corrected again, and they can again be integrated into the normal course of negative and positive." This, of course, does not mean that the secrets of the creation will be fathomed, for they will remain closed to Earth humanity for the time being, even if research into them is being diligently carried out on space stations outside of the Earth. But this does not mean that science will lie fallow, quite the contrary, for it will reveal the secret of gravity and thus begin to dominate space and mass in certain forms. It is only shortly before this time that it becomes possible for the Earth human to regrow human organs for organ transplants, so to speak, and to do so in accordance with the body concerned, which needs the organ, as a result of which the danger of the rejection reaction is averted. At this time, new advances into space are being made, and a particularly large and very important space project is being prepared. This will be the time at which Albert Einstein's theory of relativity will also undergo various complementary innovations. Although in this time a religion will carry out great warlike acts, as a result of which a new,
dangerous weapon will be developed and used, which is able to change the climate, so to speak a climate weapon, but these times will not be as uncertain as they will be in 1995.
a year in which new discoveries can be made on Mars, and a year in which a new ideology begins to emerge that differs from traditional religions. 1995 will also be the year in which a new powerful man, George W. Bush, slowly begins to develop, who wants to charm the world and gather followers around himself, like once the Pied Piper of Hamelin, which is why he is also called the Pied Piper in a prophecy. All this goes along with many innovations and discoveries in technology and science, because the year 1995 and the following years bring tremendous breakthroughs to change civilization. In the time to come, the factor of finally recognizing and correcting that which is erroneous in the calculation of the pi number will also contribute to this. The new climate weapon will cause the whole Earth to succumb to a very problematic climate change because the total temperature will drop enormously and will therefore sink. Not only the land, but also the seas will freeze by humanity's madness. As a result of this, a new invention is made, which, operated by cheapest energy, warms the Earth's atmosphere artificially. This in turn is the time when it is discovered in Japan, China, that the existing physics is not the wisdom of last knowledge, but that there is still a higher physics that reaches into the realms of the fine material. After this realization, science is discredited for some time. Nonetheless, space research continues, and a new world is found, a new Earth, which is suitable for the colonization of Earth humans. However, the actual time at which space travel and the many discoveries associated with it begin is very early. Space expeditions will be largely successful, including the uncovering or findings of former life on Mars. This will be reason enough for terrestrial humans to build and equip new and more far-reaching spacecraft, and to fly out into the vastness of space in order to make even greater and more interesting, and above all, even more important discoveries. Even if these spaceships will still be on the move for a relatively long time during the early periods, until finally propulsion possibilities are found that enable space travel at the highest speeds and without time shifts.
Until one day, faster than light spacecraft become commonplace, reaching millions of times the speed of light.
Until then, however, some hundreds of years or even millennia still pass. But nevertheless, the aforementioned prophecies and predictions already occur in the near and distant future, so that everything will not be long in coming. The beginnings of prophecies, predictions, and visions, at any rate, will also be experienced by living elderly humans of today. It will, however, be our more distant descendants who will find earlier extraterrestrial artifacts and stations of earlier humanities in distant but foreseeable time on distant worlds, and will repair them again and use them again. But all this is also connected with great dangers, because through space travel, also dangerous diseases and epidemics are brought to the Earth, as well as the extremely malignant wolf. Like a prophecy of this horror, which could either be a horrible animal or a deadly epidemic, which unfortunately cannot be clearly defined and therefore remains open for an explanation. According to prophecy, this deadly factor is to be brought in or brought to the Earth by astronauts who break the law. But besides, at that time far away, the discovery of a new and very significant matter is also called for, through which humanity gains many advantages if they are able to make use of them. All of this will be around that time when a new order gains power on the Earth, through which all needs of the human beings can be satisfied in inexpensive form. In connection with this also, overall-like suits are invented and produced for humans, which make it possible to fly through the air without any other aids. But before all this happens, just 3 decades before a third information code is discovered in the human body, while then the first decisive steps are taken to solve the problems of old age, heart, and wear and tear diseases, which lead to success after about 25 years. At about the same time, when the first steps are taken in this direction, the possibilities of a classless society and the technical biological prerequisites to clean up the polluted rivers, lakes, and oceans of the world will emerge. However, this laudable progress is countered by another extremely negative invention, which, constructed as a biological weapon, will cause a great deal of disaster and cause people and animals to age in a matter of seconds. Shortly thereafter comes the time at which the night twilight comes into its own, as another prophecy and a prediction say. This is a new technical achievement, by which the night side of the planet Earth is to be illuminated by an artificial sun from a space station in each case, whereby, however, no daylight, but only a bright twilight state is reached. The artificial sun in the sky heralds practically a new era, that of space conquest on a grand scale. Space travel will finally become commercial and an extremely important and powerful institution, by which also the secret of the creation, and thus also the origin of life and all existence will be pursued. Just by science, by which this again becomes very powerful, of course in connection with the space institution by which the scientists are controlled. This cannot go well then, of course, as it will come to pass, as it must inevitably happen, that the governments of the Earth will be more and more ignored and disadvantaged by the space facility and the scientists, which will once again give rise to disputes, provide the best conditions for a new war, only about 15 years after the aging gene has been isolated and neutralized, and thus the biological aging of humans can be defeated to a great extent, whereby the earlier malignant genetic manipulation in this respect by the creator rulers will finally be eliminated again. The renewed threat of war will break out and last for about 40 years. But first, about 6 years earlier, humans will be reconstructed into machines or robots by connecting their nerve tracts with the finest electronic biological apparatuses and machines, and thereby controlling them, which will lead to great problems about 85 years later when, as in the earliest times before, the powerful scientists will begin to play God and create new genetic breeds between humans and animals, who will then declare their solidarity with the robot humans as half humans. Until then, however, more than 8 decades will pass after the creation of robot humans, as has already been said. With the creation of robotic humans, intelligent robots of a biological, electronic, mechanical kind will also be constructed, as will a very large space station, which will have its own orbit around the sun and on which many humans will live. As is characteristic of humans through their degeneration, warlike and insurrectionary actions will not fail to arise on Mars. This happens at that time, when through an extraterrestrial consultation, the Earth humans build stations on the seabeds for habitation, which causes dangerous ecological imbalances, however, both in the seas and on land and in the air. And once again, a new, dangerous, deadly weapon is invented to decompose the bones of life forms. At the same time, the artificial sun, created some 50 years ago, will drift out of its orbit and fall to the Earth in just 72 hours. With this time, the Earth's orbit around the sun also changes, as does its own rotation, which shortens the years and days and also the nights. Unfortunately, the first space conflict or space war will take place between the Earth humans and those who emigrated to Mars, whereby the large space station will also be affected, which will be located behind the sun in an orbit around it. This will be the time when a new time calculation will be considered, because the new time of day and season of the Earth can no longer be compatible with the old one. If the Earth human of today is already under the spell of religions and sects, they will continue to be so for several hundred years to come. In this consequence, a new founder of religion will appear after the new Earth time calculation, who will suspend the Christian Sunday as well as the Islamic Friday and the Jewish Sabbath in order to create a new holiday regulation. At this time, money will also be abolished, but this will not last long, and for the time being will only remain an experiment, because the trade with values, such as precious metals and diamonds, etc., will continue underground. And so this will be the time at which the Earth human will commit the madness to change the earthly atmosphere in a terrible form. And again, a war follows on the Earth because the Earth humans still will not have become more peaceful and not cleverer. Also, with regard to scientists, nothing can be predicted in this respect that would be good, because at this time they will carry out the first human-animal genetic manipulations and create beings that will develop as so-called half-humans from human-pig crossbreeding, which will then be trained as fighting machines in order to wage wars and carry out all kinds of work in space. In the long run, however, this will not go well, because they will begin to oppose their creators as well as the robot humans, whose arms and legs will be amputated in order to be able to connect the nerve tracts with fine electronic biological apparatuses, whereby these humans will become living control organs for spaceships and weapons of all kinds, as well as for machines and all kinds of Earth vehicles, etc. At this time, a new man with the universal teaching will appear to submit it to all humankind on the Earth, which he will do remarkably well, even if counteractions will be carried out by the existing religions and sects all over the world, as has been customary with them since time immemorial. The teaching of the Spirit will be contained in the teaching, and about 40 years later, the teaching of reincarnation will be spread worldwide and will also be recognized by the existing religions. Before this, however, there will be unpleasant encounters with extraterrestrials, which can result in a pleasant connection if the Earth humans take the right path. Otherwise, the unpleasant and under certain circumstances also dangerous perspective remains. At this time, humanity also learns to slowly prevent natural disasters through technical intervention. Especially active volcanoes can be calmed and their activity can be contained, as well as weather influences can be brought under control. At the same time, however, warlike actions come into play again on the Earth, which are triggered by the invention or discovery of a new and very valuable energy, whereby their ownership rights will be at stake. Problems also arise with the humans themselves, because their relative immortality, respectively, their longevity will already amount to about 250, 350 years at that time, which of course creates more and more overpopulation problems and all other problems resulting from it, to which also migrations of peoples belong, from which also new mixed peoples develop. Like, for example, one that will call itself Eurasian and claim the Eurasian space as its home. At that time, when the half humans, the human animal gene manipulated ones, and the robot humans will cause enormous problems, which will lead to a nasty decline of all space programs and almost bring them to a standstill, because the robot humans and half humans will refuse to continue to work for the normal humans and live a miserable existence of inferiority and exploitation as living controls for spaceships, vehicles and machines, and as fighting machines, and so on, etc. This, in turn, will happen at the time when a climatic collapse will take place on the Earth, when the sun will become noticeably weaker in its function because its nuclear fusions will diminish. The exploratory urge of the Earth humans knows no borders. Consequently, they penetrate further and further into the world space, which unfortunately, however, will also bring about disadvantageous effects. So it cannot be avoided that unexpected horrors will appear, because Providence says that at this no longer very distant time, the Earth human will encounter something very horrible on their space expeditions, which then brings with it great and difficult problems. An event that is to take place about 20 years later, when the frightening and certain realization is gained that the sun is indeed a dying star. And again, about 35 years later, a new horror will hit the Earth humans, when by a space research ship of Earthlings from a distant planet, a deadly epidemic is introduced on the Earth, which medical science will face helplessly. At this time, the knowledge about the meaning of the creation will be known for about 35 years, as well as the truth that negative and positive in themselves form an independent unity, as well as they are a perfect unity when put together. Only shortly after this realization, the aforementioned space research ship will be launched, which will meet with great horror. Equipped with a completely new propulsion, the ship is to penetrate expedition-wise so far into space that the original home planets of the first gene-manipulated ones are to be reached. A company which at this point is still completely irresponsible for the Earth human, because on the one hand, they are still trapped in their genetic degeneration, and on the other hand, in their megalomania, they dangerously underestimate the dangers of the world space and foreign worlds, which proves itself only about halfway to the original home and origin planets of the genetically manipulated ones when the expedition encounters terrible extraterrestrial life. This world space expedition becomes possible only because at this time the technical equipment and machines and all electronic instruments, etc., no longer have to be operated and controlled by humans, but are equipped with an independent biological intelligence, which makes every control and operation almost infallible. One day, however, robot humans will rebel against this, and they will still be performing their functions at that time. At this time, Earth-human space travel reaches the peak of its development for the time being, although research does not stand still, through which further mysteries of matter are soon fathomed and solved. The emerging domination of the robot humans under the leadership of one of their peers, who as an enemy of all other human life forms will make a name for himself, but will soon be caught up in death, is also in flux. At this time, the megalomaniac scientists once again stage a tremendous spectacle by creating a gigantic second sun. Although it will only be a small group of scientists, they will ignite a soul planet through a dangerous experiment, which will burn for 7 days and glisten as a second sun in the Sol system before it extinguishes and becomes dark. Both Jupiter and Saturn, which are two unfinished small suns, are suitable for such an experiment. Thus, the question of which planets will be chosen for this madness, which will take place in the future, should become superfluous. At the same time, brain research will also make great progress and implant micromodules in the human and animal scalp, through which all control functions of the brain can be taken over and executed. So this will also be the time when an artificial world will be settled in a foreign solar system very far away from the Earth by a big wave of emigration, because the still increasing overpopulation of the Earth planet still rises unreasonably. At the same time, the robot humans become a dangerous problem for the normal humans, because now also these begin to multiply and bear many descendants, who, genetically manipulated, are born without arms and legs, but already with exposed nerve endings, so that they can be connected to the apparatuses and machines, etc., without operative interventions. Robot humans will become a real danger for normal people, because they will have undreamt of powers of consciousness, which they will develop in the course of time and as a result of the supernormal use of consciousness, whereby the brain will be supplied to its function from outside with special energies through a very specially devised energy generator, whereby the powers of consciousness can be brought to maximum performance. There comes a time when, with the weakening of the sun's nuclear fusions, enormous changes will take place in the Sol system. Not only will the entire gravitational field be out of control and change, but large-scale climate change will also be the order of the day. This spurs scientists on to peak performance because they want to counteract the negative effects of the sun, which, in contrast to erroneous scientific assumptions, will appear much earlier over many millennia than previously assumed up till now. Only now is it really recognized correctly that the sun is a dying star and thus the collapse of the Sol system is already determined, even if the sun will continue to exist still approximately 4.1,041,000,000 years. However, then already as dead star, which is swallowed then after this time by a black hole and is destroyed. So the scientists begin to perform at their best and find the miscalculations underlying the pi number. By correcting and now correctly calculating the pi number, the scientists and the incredibly sophisticated technology will be able to harness unimaginable energies for the Earth. By making it possible for them to derive energies from black holes in the wide area of the Milky Way and make them usable for the Earth. At this time, however, scientists will still not be able to reach the center of our galaxy to tap into the black hole there. However, this will not be necessary for the time being because the surrounding objects for energy generation are completely sufficient to serve the Earth. This new energy production, as well as the kind of the energy itself, will henceforth make it possible for the Earth human to develop new space travel forms, in whose consequence and extension also that travel and transport factor becomes reality, which in the year 1995 and all time before, as well as still for a long time into the future, is called fantasy and impossible, namely time travel. This invention, in turn, enables humanity to travel into the past and the future, as well as into the vastness of the universe, which was previously impossible. As a result, it is, of course, inevitable that new forms of human life will be discovered. Extraterrestrials from whom Earth people will learn a great deal and unimagined things, and who are immensely more intelligent than the Earth humans themselves. This, in turn, leads to rapid development in all areas, whereby biological intelligences of artificial form are created, which are used for the control and handling of all apparatuses, devices, electronics and machines, as well as flight and driving, etc., in a form in which it need not be feared that the biological intelligences would become independent and pose a danger to the terrestrial humans, as will be the case with the robot humans, who, as a result, will no longer be needed and will therefore, in short, be exterminated. Now comes the time when all space stations and satellites around the Earth and around Mars, as well as Venus, will crash because the condition of the sun changes due to the ever weaker activity in such a form that enormous changes of the gravitational fields of all planets and the sun itself occur. Once again, the scientists begin to work at full speed to find a solution, but this does not succeed, but leads to the success of discovering another and extremely important factor in the creation formula. But already the planet Earth is threatened by a new threat from the world space, this time from the depths of the central universe itself. But this danger will only become recognizable as such much later. Only then will Earth humans again place artificial suns in the Earth's orbit, but far beyond the usual distance. But even with this, people will not have much luck because one of the artificial suns will glow up due to severe damage and burn large areas of the Earth. The atmosphere will also be dangerously affected, causing oxygen shortages, which will then result in worldwide fighting. This catastrophe will also give rise to a second one, because the burning of the land and the lack of oxygen will not be without consequences by nature. But everything will also harm the economy and the entire food industry, from which a famine will arise, just as the world has never seen and never experienced such a famine during all the times that have passed over thousands of years. This will then be the beginning of the end of conventional space travel, because just under a decade later, only the most modern technology of time travel will be common practice, through which millions of light years can be bridged or hastened through without any loss of time, so that humanity is then no longer limited in their ability to cope with distance. This also marks the point in time when gerontology will be able to free humans from the curse of rapid aging by gene reverse manipulation, which was carried out at the earliest time by the genetic manipulators, the creator rulers, by a special genetic manipulation of the then early combat humans. Through this reverse manipulation, humanity will reach a much higher age than has already been achieved through earlier interventions by earthly geneticists. And as a result, the average age of terrestrial humans will rise to about 400 years. What will now be achieved in a new form, however, will then move within a human lifetime that must be set extremely high and calculated at thousands of years. In the next few years that follow, intelligent sea dwellers will communicate with humans and begin to make contact with them, from which a new breed of Earth dwellers will emerge. But this will also be the time when aggressions with the Mars inhabitants will be initiated, from which attacks on the colonies will actually be launched. After that, 15 years of relative rest will follow, which will finally bring happiness to Earth humans in search of their actual origin, because a space expedition of Earth humans will penetrate into the Sirius regions and discover or find there the proofs for the primeval origin of the Earth humans, who were conceived in earliest time as genetically manipulated ones by the creator rulers in the Sirius areas and then fled. After which the SOL system was found and settled on long journeys and over many millennia. So Earth humankind finally finds its way back to its origin, but this will not solve its problems faster. This discovery is of course connected with the contacts with the very distant descendants of the former creator rulers, as well as with other Sirius intelligences, which, however, no longer leads to the persecution and slaughter of the descendants of the genetically manipulated ones, the terrestrial humans, but to cooperation, which will also have the consequence that the former genetic manipulation will be finally reversed, whereby descendants will then be brought into the world who are again normal, and thus no longer degenerate, whereby the circle will finally close again and humanity will actually become human, in balance of the negative and the positive. The reversal of the formerly degenerative gene manipulation, as well as the still increasing overpopulation, which is all the more triggered by the enormously high life expectancy of the human beings, will have the result that those who have not yet been genetically manipulated on the Earth, and in all colonies on all of the Earth humans' inhabited worlds and space stations, etc., are to be brought to extinction in a manner that has been proclaimed and demanded by responsibly minded ones for a long time in the past, namely by a worldwide birth freeze in a 7-year cycle. Within this framework, only offspring should be allowed to be fathered by parents whose degeneration has already been remedied by reverse gene manipulation. Only such humans will therefore still be entitled to procreate in order to procreate legally permitted offspring. Any unauthorized procreation will be associated with the strictest measures, because from now on, such procreation will be classified as the worst crime of all and punished with the death of the guilty party. This will be enshrined as an unavoidable law only about 5 years before the total control over the Earth is transferred to the administrative sphere of the Sirius Federation and carried out from there. However, at that distant time, the Earth will nevertheless have ambitious scientists who will gain new insights and make new discoveries, also in the field of chemistry, from which they will wrest the last secrets. For in spite of the immense knowledge that will be imparted to Earth people by extraterrestrial intelligences, by no means all the secrets of all things have been fathomed and solved, which is why research will continue diligently. Also with regard to astronomy, whereby they will penetrate into the center of the Milky Way in order to fathom its secret and that of the black hole. The function of the sun causes more and more worries to the inhabitants of the Earth, because it becomes noticeably weaker and weaker and is no longer able to produce enough energy to donate light and warmth for the Earth and Mars. For a long time now, it has been part of everyday life that artificial suns will circle around the Earth at a great distance, illuminating and warming it. This, however, will not be harmless either, as can be seen from the event that takes place about 70 years after the death penalty law for the procreation of illegal offspring, when two of the artificial suns collide destructively and cause great damage. These are by and large the prophecies, predictions, and my visions for a whole series of the following centuries and millennia, whereby the order of the enumeration is somewhat interrelated, and whereby also only just the most important coming events are mentioned, besides which still many other things run, as for example in political, military, religious, scientific, evolutionary, and cosmic regard, etc., such as, for example, the prediction that the still existing social forms of earthly states will be abolished and replaced to such an extent that humans will no longer have to provide for old age by their own strength and by their own finances, because society or the state as a whole will pay for it. And this because the production of food can be promoted to such an extent by cheapest energy that everything will be distributed free of charge. Much more cheap energy will be produced than can be consumed by Earth humans. As a result, the cost of living will practically fall to zero, which means that old age pensions, etc., as well as other financial support, will become null and void, not least because financial means are no longer needed for subsistence, which also means that the money for this will lose its value completely and will only retain a certain significance for the fulfillment of special wishes, such as for leisure activities and hobbies, etc. Nevertheless, this will not solve the problem of money in such a manner that money as a form of payment would be finally abolished, because even in the near and distant future, earthly humanity will still be trapped in their thinking about money, as a whole number of the next centuries will still be shaped by it, even if 2 attempts are made to completely abolish money, which are, however, doomed to failure because humanity simply will not separate themselves from money and wealth so quickly. For this reason, all attempts in this direction will be undermined by simply trading gold, silver, platinum, palladium, and other valuable metals yet to be discovered, as well as precious stones, jewelry, etc., underground, which will lead to the collapse of the attempts. This does not mean, however, that in the much more distant future, money will not be finally forbidden by law, because this development is just as pre-programmed as the fact that in the near future, the breeding of animals can be renounced, because through genetic engineering a way is finally found which makes it possible for plants to produce animal protein, which the human needs. Finally, the scientists recognize that this is actually possible through genetic manipulation, and the time for this realization will come very soon, even if the actualization takes place much later, which is due to the cries of the anti-gene manipulation ones, who are weak-headed and uncomprehending in the face of genetic engineering and genetic manipulation. These contrarian screamers are therefore to blame for the fact that for a long time to come, mass animal breeding and mass animal transports and mass animal cruelties in the numbers of billions will burden life, because the truth is that the solution to plant animal protein production and a fully fledged meat substitute product could have been produced by genetic engineering and put on the market as food a long time ago, if the feeble-minded contrarian criers had not prevented this for decades. Through their fault, many billions of animals will have to suffer unspeakably until the mouths of the idiotic screamers are finally forcibly shut and they are silenced. Only then will the evils of mass animal breeding and all the tortures, etc., that occur for animals of all kinds come to an end. Also in the prophecies, Predictions and visions it was not spoken of, that the scientists will soon recognize that the earthly atmosphere for the Earth human being does not correspond actually to the norm, which should actually be given for a longer life. Although the change of the genetically manipulated offspring to the earthly atmosphere was mentioned in the prophecies, predictions, and visions, it was not said that the scientists would come across the fact that earthly breathing air is not suitable for humans and that it also contributes much to the faster aging of humans. Neither has it been said that the knowledge will lead to a production of healthier and more pleasing air for the human body in the near future, after which this new and better air composition can be bought in bottles for private use and for the small extension of life. Not only is the oxygen-nitrogen ratio not right in earthly air, but also various gases that humans inhale with the air are dangerous, as is the much too low oxygen content. Also, the Earth itself has not been mentioned in the prophecies, predictions, and visions. For example, the fact that it has remained hidden from all scientists for thousands of years that the planet is not simply enlarged by falling stardust and meteors, etc. But that it expands imperceptibly from the inside, which means that for thousands of years, a hardly noticeable expansion process takes place, through which the inner treasures of the Earth are slowly but surely being created on the Earth's surface. This expansion process becomes faster and faster over time as the sun's nuclear fusion subside, changing the entire gravitational fields of the solar system in particular, and specifically those of all planets. In the prophecies, predictions, and visions that have been made so far, it has probably been said that the Earth humans will discover and invent time travel and break open the dimensions of the future and the past. However, it was not said that various other dimensions would be discovered and found, and that undreamt of possibilities would be opened up to humans. However, there will also be many dangers associated with this, both physical and those caused by intelligences of foreign dimensions. There will be new conflicts in this respect, but many things will also come true that were previously only laughed at as science fiction stories. There will also be many power struggles and upheavals on the Earth, even when the Earth's rulers will no longer reside on the planet, but on space stations around the Earth. But even there, they will not be safe for a very long time, because certain prophecies speak of the fact that the rulers will also be overthrown up there. Then follows an evil time, which is once again influenced by the guilt of the scientists in the form that an animal is made subservient to human beings, which however contains many negative, evil, and degenerate things, which however is only triggered and broken through by its subservience to human beings, as a result of which the animal or the animals begins to attack human beings, which degenerates to such an extent that it will literally hunt down Earth humans and will kill them in masses. Whether the beast is now introduced to the Earth from the vastness of the universe or comes from Earth, this prophecy, unfortunately, remains silent about that. In any case, however, the humans of the entire world will be forced to defend themselves against this beast or against these animals. But this will not bring much benefit, and consequently, ultimately, for all Earth humans, only the flight to a single continent is possible, which will be developed into a gigantic bulwark. 300 years later, the scientists will once again make a horrendous name for themselves. For their haughtiness and arrogance will once again go so far that they will appear to be God and delusionally believe that they are creation's equal and irreplaceable in every form. Then, about 100 years later, there is a very evil aggressor action on the neighboring planet Mars, which is attacked with many spaceships and completely destroyed until the complete elimination of matter. At that time also the destroyer will be talked about again, because through the completely changed gravitational fields of the entire solar system by the rapid diminishing of the solar function, the ancient wandering planet, which has already caused mischief for millions of years, in the old Lyra areas, penetrates again into the inner solar system with an exact course to the Earth.
Note Ptor of 13.1. 2005. This danger was removed, because the wandering planet was brought by the efforts of the Pleiaren on a course outside of the inner solar system into the outermost ring belt of the Sol system. Therefore, the whole predicted event will not happen.
Only sparsely populated, the destructive Wanderer threatens the complete destruction of the Earth, which the Earth humans have nothing to oppose. They are neither able to steer the destroyer into another orbit as a result of the suddenly completely out of control gravitational fields of the entire solar system, nor are they able to destroy it, which on the other hand would be of no use anymore, because the Earth now becomes uninhabitable due to the enormous changes of the Sun. For this reason, the last few million Earth humans leave and flee the planet to seek a new planet elsewhere in order to colonize it, with the help of the descendants of the former Earth humans from the Sirius regions.
Note Ptah of 13.1. 2005. The prophecy of the flight of humans from the Earth still exists, however in connection with the consequences of the passing away of the Sun.
It will come as it must come. After the failure of earthly scientists in their attempt to destroy the Wanderer, their haughtiness and arrogance sink to zero, and so they join forces with the human beings to flee from the threatened planet Earth. Only 3 years later, the destroyer penetrates the former Mars orbit and rams the two moons Phobos and Deimos, which remained intact during the destruction of the planet. The moons break and follow in tow after the big wandering planet, which races from now on to the Earth's orbit and reaches the planet also, without ramming it, however. Nonetheless, it causes a tremendous catastrophe by ramming the Earth's moon, which shatters it and the destroyer itself into innumerable pieces that lie in a huge rotating belt around the Earth, whereby also the seas, lakes, and rivers are torn from their beds and evaporate into the atmosphere as a result of the great heat generated. The water vapor and an enormous part of the atmosphere are torn out into the world's space and evaporate, while also the millennia-old and imperceptible expansion process of the Earth now becomes visible and it heats up from the inside, whereby the Earth's surface becomes finally uninhabitable.
Note Ptah of 13.1. 2005. The prophecy regarding the swelling of the Earth remains, while the prophesied events concerning the traveling planet Destroyer are obsolete, as has already been said above.
Over the course of time that follows, Mercury will collide with and fall into the Sun, causing a tremendous catastrophe and destroying the final harmony of the Sol system. The Sun will again generate massive eruptions and nuclear fusions and protuberances for a century and a half that will extend far into space, while the planetary orbits will be so disturbed that they will no longer revolve around the Sun. The Sun does not blow up and does not become a supernova, but after all these events it glows and glows weakly, with occasional gas explosions and nuclear fusions, which over time become more and more extinct to eventually end completely, after which the Sun travels through space as a dead dark star, surrounded by equally dead planets. The end will finally be that the dead Sun and its still accompanying satellites, which simply float around it, will be attracted by a black hole and torn into it, in order to compress with tremendous force and remain inside for such a long time, until by a tremendous explosion of the black hole this ejects its entire matter, whereby new gases and fine particles, etc., are thrown out. This, however, takes many billions of years, because according to calculations, it takes about 10 billion, 10,000 years alone, during which the Sun and its planets die and then continue to exist dead before they are devoured by the said black hole and finally destroyed. What is important to mention are the women and their position among men in the future time, because the woman will regain her former and original rank in the men's world in the distant future, in full equality and equal rights in all duties, tasks, and work in a common women-men's world, as was the case at the earliest time when men and women were in complete equality, collaborated, and worked together. As in the earliest times, however, in the distant future, it will again be the case that women, when they have children of their own, will have to devote themselves primarily to them again in a caring and educative form, etc., to which the care of the household belongs, while men, as since time immemorial, have had to take care of and endeavor to take care of those things, and concerns which have also been assigned to them because of their male physical constitution, etc. This also means that the emancipation that has grown in modern times and the pushing of women into high and responsible positions alone and in sole control, etc., will finally be dismantled in the distant future in order to make room for equality and equal rights between men and women, whereby then, as in the earliest times, women and men will again handle everything jointly and in equal parts, whereby neither man nor woman can stand out in terms of position and power in business, administration, and government, as is still common and possible today. It is also important to mention the fact that in relation to diseases and epidemics on the earth, a lot of negative things will happen in the coming time, which is why every individual person should be careful to maintain very careful hygiene and avoid direct physical contact with humans with whom one cannot be completely certain that they have not succumbed to any disease. Even otherwise completely harmless diseases or infections can lead to much more severe and even incurable ailments in the future, which is why special care should be taken in this regard. This also applies to touchings and bodily contact with animals, whereby the danger for diseases and epidemics that can be transmitted to humans is especially present in this respect, in the form that deadly diseases and epidemics can be caused by the consumption of animal food as well as by the absorption of viruses and bacilli, etc., from animal deposits, such as feces, saliva, blood and hair, etc.
Note PTA of 13.1. 2005. See, for example, bird epidemic, swine bird flu, and other upcoming epidemics and diseases.
For this reason alone, no animals of any kind should be kept in human homes or tolerated even temporarily. In order to explain the facts about the Pleiadians or Pleiaren and the Old Lyrans, the following must be said: the Pleiadians Pleiaren, as distant descendants of the Old Lyrans, have no contact whatsoever with the Sirius intelligences or with today's descendants of the former creator rulers, neither with the positive nor with the negative species. Such contacts are also not planned for the time being, neither for the present nor for the near future. Nevertheless, the ring of the two lines should one day be closed again, which, however, will be only then, or at the earliest, when the genetic manipulations have been reversed. Because only at that time, the descendants of the former producer rulers will be evolutively so highly developed that the Pleiadian Pleiaren will be able to make contact with them. This also applies to the Sirius intelligences, who are completely different human races outside the Hanuk lineage of origin and have no degree of kinship in any wise. Today's Pleiadians, that is to say Pleiaren, as well as today's Lyran and today's Dal universe peoples of the Hanok, Nocademian lineage, that is to say Nocademian Hanok lineage, are among those human life forms who are so highly developed in consciousness-based and spiritual form that they can no longer come into contact with less developed human life forms. As Earth humans and the Sirius area dwellers and many other human races on other worlds are, without being endangered by the low swinging waves of the underdeveloped of life. On the other hand, their laws also forbid them to make contact with and interfere in the affairs of such underdeveloped humans, because it would dangerously disrupt the self-evolution of the underdeveloped ones. Every human form of life, as well as every other form of life, must evolve itself by its own power, whereby only certain knowledge and information, etc., may be fed to it in an impulse-based manner by higher forms of life, which, on the one hand, are not recognized as such, and on the other hand, do not offer the possibility of attaining greater and more comprehensive knowledge and possibilities than the lower level of evolution permits. The reason for the Pleiadians Pleiaren not being in contact with the descendants of the former creator rulers in the Sirius regions and in other places where they live, as well as with the actual Sirius intelligences, is therefore also to be found therein. When long ago the old Lyrans came to Earth and began to work here among the Earth humans, whose actual origin was elsewhere, as has already been explained several times. They chose times when the positive as well as the negative creator rulers, or their distant descendants, were not present in the Sol system, and thus also not on the Earth, or had already moved away again. The old Lyrans and also later the Pleiadian Plearan were always anxious not to encounter the creator rulers or their descendants because, on the one hand, they wanted to go their own ways, and on the other hand, they would inevitably have been involved in warlike actions with the other Henoch lineage as a result of the differentiated worldview, which had ultimately led to the breeding of the genetically manipulated ones by the producer rulers, which was condemned by the ancient Syrians just as deeply as their descendants, the Pleiadians, Plearan, do. Since then, any contact with the Sirius inhabitants of the Henoch lineage has been avoided, as have contacts with the actual Ur-Sirius intelligences, who were no better than the other inhabitants. On the other hand, the old Lyrans were already further advanced in their evolution than the Sirius area inhabitants of the other Henoch lineage and the actual Sirius intelligences. So for this reason alone, contacts were out of the question, because such contacts would have been too dangerous for life and limb. The old Lyrans were still quite warlike and scheming, etc., but at the same time they were not denied the evolution of consciousness and mind, except for those who did not fit into the evolution by force, and therefore had to leave the Lyra Vega areas, etc., and came into the Sol system. But among them were also well-disposed ones and evolutionists who took the sacrifice to go with the fugitives in order to teach them further and to bring them on the right path of humanity and evolution, which they succeeded in doing in the course of time, even if many things went wrong again and again. And these old Syrians then mixed with the Earth humans, just as the descendants of the creator rulers from the Sirius regions had done before. And therefore the descendants of the old Syrians were also hereditarily confronted with genetic manipulation and affected like all other humans on the Earth. This happened in a relatively short time, because already after about 3 millennia, no human life form could be found on the Earth that had not been genetically manipulated. This was true both for the 140 few 210 leaders, sub-leaders, and the very positive spirit leaders, who voluntarily took everything upon themselves to teach the refugee people the teaching of the Spirit, etc., as well as for the several millions of the normal humans. This made it possible that since then not a single human life form has existed on the Earth that would not carry the legacy of the degeneration of the negative and the positive, only depending on how the balance is achieved in the individual human being, although degenerations often come to light, both in negative and positive form. Even though the ancient Lyrans were, in a certain wise, already far evolutionarily, they still lacked the observance of the creational natural laws, as a result of which they very often disobeyed them and wreaked havoc, which, however, referred only to those few million who had to flee from their homeworlds. They also acted equally on the Earth, which led them to adopt the religions invented by the descendants of the creator rulers and to rise up to become creator gods in order to cast their spell over the Earth humans. Thus, the old Lyrans were not the actual inventors and founders of the original religions with their god creators and creator gods, but they were only the unscrupulous beneficiaries of the equally unscrupulous creator ruler descendants, through the religious legends and fables of religion, as well as fables of gods and fables of world origin, etc., which were brought into being, on the one hand, to cover up the real origin of the Sol system humans from Mars, Melona, and the Earth, and to let them fall into oblivion so that they would not one day find their way back to the Sirius regions. And on the other hand, so that quarrels and wars would arise among the genetically manipulated precisely through the religions, whereby they should exterminate themselves so that they could never come up again and start their way back to their original homeland. The ancient Lyran Vegans became better sensed with time, and so they began to follow the teaching of the Spirit and thus the creational natural laws and recommendations, whereby their entire evolution rapidly leapt forward and lifted them up high. As a result, they were even more careful not to come into contact with the creator-ruler descendants or with the Sirius intelligences in any manner. So they retreated to the home planets after a peace agreement with the inhabitants of the home planets, while another group withdrew into another dimension beyond the constellation of the Pleiades. So they remained as far away from this dimension as the old Lyran vegans and those who found a new home beyond the constellation of the Hyades, about 150 light years distance from the Earth. A third group left our universe, the Dern universe, and penetrated into the twin universe, into the Dal universe, where the peoples multiplied and united with many other peoples to form a huge federation, as it also happened with the Pleiadians Pleiaren, whose federation exists offset to our space-time continuum by a fraction of a second and covers an area of about 70 million light years in diameter, whereby also some few Federation members, respectively, Federation planets are located in our space-time continuum.
With all this should be said actually enough, without special explanations still needing to be made. I will not argue with myself about the dates anyway, because I think it would be completely out of place to know the times when the events will take place. But what might be of interest for the group and for all other humans is the fact that for years it was not allowed to talk about certain things related to visits of extraterrestrial intelligences, except of those that were mentioned by you and especially by you. You told me that I was allowed to speak openly about this when you left.
That is correct.